Hey there, Shadow Dancers.
Welcome to another Flashlight.
This week we'll be taking a dive into the launch of D&D 3rd Edition, the switch to 3.5, and the rise of Pathfinder.
Let's roll initiative. So, like we talked about in a previous Flashlight, in 1997, Wizards of the Coast bought TSR, the people who make D&D, for $25 million, which is like $49 million in today's dollars. And so, for the first time in the existence of Dungeons & Dragons, it was actually like a big, well-capitalized project, right? Because we talked previously about like the financing stuff they had to rely on, these factoring arrangements and stuff. Mm-hmm. They didn't need that anymore.
They just have straight up cash.
They have cash on hand. They have professional management. They're not even the company's biggest product at the time, right? The company's biggest product at the time is Magic the Gathering, right? And actually, probably the license to print Pokemon cards, which Wizards of the Coast also had at the time, which is wild to think about, was probably also bigger. And so we're going to talk about this, like their development process, now that they actually had the money and time to actually sit down and think about how the next game was going to go. And anyway, 3 years later, they released D&D 3rd Edition. We'll talk a little bit about that, but what might be surprising is that 3 years after that, in 2003, they had already followed up with D&D 3.5.
Oh.
Yeah, and the idea was to like tidy up the rules, maybe to boost their sales, but it's a version of D&D that still gets played today. And it's also the foundation for the first edition of Pathfinder.
Oh.
Yeah, so let's get into what happened with 3rd edition, what changed in 3.5, and what it says about the development of TTRPGs in the late 90s and early 2000s, when this was starting to become big business.
Big business.
So yeah, like one thing that they could do right off the bat was like big systemized playtesting. D&D 3rd edition had a lot going on in the playtesting, in terms of playtesting, and we know this because we were able to track down Dragon Magazine, one of the two kind of quasi-official. The other one was called Dungeon Magazine.
Ooh.
And Dragon Magazine.
Oh, I just got it. Dragon and Dungeons.
You know it. And these are kind of like the quasi-official like D&D magazines in that era, because this is the 90s and magazines are still a thing.
Oh, I wish magazines were still a thing, honestly.
Yeah. But in issue 274, which we were able to track down, they actually talk about the 3rd edition playtesting process. In summer 1998, they start recruiting playtesters, and by February 1999, they have 100 groups all lined up, right? 100 tables, which is about 600 people in total to do playtesting.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like a big systemized, organized effort to get feedback on playtesting from people who were not the convenient sample, the friends and family of the developers, but from like a lot of tables that actually act quite differently. And, this is a big deal at the time. They did all their recruiting for these groups over the internet.
Well, that's the most 90s thing ever.
Right?
Magazines are still big, but we have this fancy new thing called the internet. Forums. Did they have like a presence online, like D&D itself?
I believe they did. This was mostly through email and people forwarding an email being like, if you're interested, email this address.
Gotcha.
And to prevent leaks, because one thing the internet enabled was like leaks of these playtest materials.
Right.
They sent every one of those 100 tables a different version of the draft with a different password. So if the file got leaked, they could see what password was used and figure out who leaked it.
Genius.
And apparently there were no leaks. So, it did work out. Big flip side, they could only target people who had internet at home, right? Mm-hmm. December 1998, less than 1/3 of people in the United States use the internet at the time.
I feel like the overlap between hardcore D&D players that want to play test and people who have a dial-up internet connection is fairly high.
It probably was. We don't have good stats on who was playing at the time. We do have good stats on who was using the internet at the time.
Oh.
We'll link to some Department of Commerce. There's like a report called like A Nation Online from like 2000, and we'll link to it. And, as you might expect, as of December 1998, kind of the midpoint of this testing sign up, The people who had internet were like way more likely to be white or Asian, way more likely to have advanced degrees, more likely to be affluent. And we actually talked with Perry a couple weeks ago about the first Chult book that came out.
Yes.
And how it had some perspectives on the world that felt a little bit limited. This is that era when that first Chult book was coming out, and you might think that that the recruiting people off the internet was doing some sample selection that was not really helping out Wizards of the Coast with getting a diverse pool of playtesters. I'll put it that way. But yeah, being part of this like big company meant they were able to invest like a lot of effort into this systematic playtest. And I don't know, by modern tabletop gaming standards, it's not clear that this is actually a gigantic investment. This is comparable in scale to what a third-party publisher like Kobold Press does for their playtests now. But at the time, this is a pretty big undertaking. And by all accounts, the feedback they got was a big part of how the mechanics were built for 3rd edition. And side note, in that Dragon Magazine article, Kim Mohan, who is the lead designer of D&D 3rd edition, wrote, quote, "I wouldn't be surprised if some of our playtesters end up getting jobs as game designers. They were that good." And 2 of the playtesters were Kevin Kelp and Dorian Hart, who have actually gone on to develop very successful TTRPGs over the last quarter century.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Do you know what the names are of those?
Yeah, so Kevin Kelp has made quite a few games. One of them is called Swords of the Serpentine, which I believe won some Emmy awards, and it's about you're like a detective in a fantasy world. It's that kind of TTRPG.
Ooh.
Yeah, and Time Watch, which is about time travel.
I'd love me some time travel.
Honestly, they both sound real fun. Dorian Hart is involved in video game development, worked on the BioShock series and also the Thief series of games.
I believe that's Irrational Games.
That sounds right. And
let's go with it.
Let's go with it. This is a fact check free zone in the flashlights. I'm kidding. We'll link to everything in the show notes below, except for this magazine, which we can't link to because it is a magazine that is not really readily available online. But if you Google it, it's edition 274. You might be able to find it. And yeah, Dorian Hart worked on those games, and since then has also become a fantasy novelist. So it's just kind of cool. Like, the article's like, wow, these 2 playtesters, they could really have a career in game design, and a couple of them absolutely did that.
Cool.
In terms of what's new in the in 3rd edition, like this game that came out of all this playtesting, right? The biggest and most exciting change, I think, is the D20 system. The idea that to get like a success or failure, you roll a D20, you add some modifiers, and there's a threshold above which you succeed.
Wait, that started in 3rd version?
Yeah, so
version
in previous
3?
editions, different attempts to do different things might use different dice.
Oh, gotcha, yeah.
And the idea that everything starts with, to see whether you succeeded, roll a d20, add a number, and compare it to some threshold that you may or may not know. And that as a unified, standardized vision for how to resolve things, that comes really from D&D 3rd edition.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and like people refer to systems like this as D20 systems, right? It's such a baked in part of what's going on. And not everything in 3rd edition used this approach, but pretty much everything did, and there was a real attempt to unify mechanics under the D20.
Yes, streamline everything.
Yeah. So that part of gameplay and combat was a lot more streamlined. On a broader scale, there was a lot more customization of your characters, like journey. This included like getting away from the idea that some characters were just like innately evil, which wasn't always fun for the rest of the table, as you can imagine. A lot more feats and specializations, and a removal of some assumptions about what a PC would want to do at high levels. And like just as a refresh for anyone who hasn't played old school D&D, before 3rd edition, the game assumes that as a member of a given class, you're going to become a really specific type of character in the long run. By 8th level, a cleric has 2d10 times 10 fanatically devoted followers. They establish a temple and those followers just show up. Could you roll me 2d10 real quick?
Yes. That one. Okay. I got a 6.
Okay, 2 of those.
And a 3.
Cool. So you have 90 fanatically devoted followers that just show up once you establish a temple.
What can I do with these followers?
I think they're mostly like temple custodians and stuff like that, but you can order them to do things. They don't have great, martial stats or anything like that.
But there is 90 of them.
There's a lot of them, yeah.
Okay, got the cannon fodder.
I mean, at 9th level, a fighter can build a stronghold and starts attracting loyal warriors who will actually fight for them.
Wow.
Like, the idea is that a high-level cleric is going to become like almost not necessarily a cult leader, but like a charismatic religious figure.
Yeah. This sounds like it turns into a real-time strategy game because you have like a group of people you can command.
A little bit. Yeah. And it's, it's assumed that you're going to spend more and more of your time on the logistics of running your temple or your stronghold or whatever.
Yeah.
And you have all this gold from your missions, right? Because
Right.
in these older editions, gold is XP, XP is gold.
Gotcha.
So you have all this gold and now you have a stronghold or a temple or whatever. And like the idea was that's the natural end state. Every fighter aspires to be a warlord.
Okay.
My favorite is druids. A druid can only get to level 12 by beating another level 12 druid in one-on-one combat.
That's amazing.
Either spell
What?
or hand-to-hand. Same with level 13, same with level 14. So like in these older editions, a high-level druid was someone who was locked in a tournament to be the best druid in the world.
Honestly, that's really cool sounding.
It's really cool sounding. It does not at all go with the flavor of the druid as the wise guardian of nature.
No, it doesn't.
I'm a wise guardian of nature, and I got this title by
Kumite?
Yeah. But yeah, no, exactly. And so the third edition kind of did away with that and gave a lot more flexibility in terms of what the high levels could look like, right? It also introduced prestige classes, which are kind of, they build on top of existing classes at high levels, and a lot more feats and abilities and the chance to multi-class. And this gives you a lot more mechanical choices, right? But the trade-off, we talked about this with Magic a few weeks ago, and the idea that Magic was the game that introduced the idea of a meta. Right. Having a lot more choices in D&D also introduced this idea of a meta. So they introduced a lot of options, and that led to people quickly identifying specific party compositions.
Right, to min-max.
Yeah, a little bit. But, honestly, it's kind of cool that you could do that. It's cool to think that the game had the strategic depth that allowed you to min-max in the first place. And then the last big change, I think, and this is one that we almost take for granted now, but I think 3rd edition was the first edition that was sufficiently confident to use its own lore and treat the world of Dungeons and Dragons as like a separate world that people would kind of be familiar with the milieu of, right? Because previous editions had assumed you'd be playing in like a specific historical setting, and they would say like, hey, these are the weapons you'd expect to see in Renaissance Europe. You might want to give those to your characters. But by 3rd edition, the developers were like, no, people have been playing D&D for a long time. They know what kind of the D&D vibe is like. So they're like, we don't need any explanation of where this is used in the real world. We're going to have classes like Monk. That's like a martial arts character. It doesn't show up in Tolkien or any of these like vaguely European historical settings, but it's fun and it feels D&D-ish, right? They brought back a lot of the Greyhawk deities from older versions. So instead of there being like a vague, like, well, whatever god of war your characters worship in like 2nd edition AD&D, 3rd edition said, no, you have Erithnul, the god of slaughter. and characters like that. And so it really feels, in addition to these mechanical refinements, both at the micro level with the D20, macro level with more flexible character progression, it really just feels a lot more confident in terms of referencing the D&D mythos and D&D vibe, as opposed to being like, here is how to accurately wargame this period of history, because that's not what we're doing. There's magic, there's elves, there's dragons. This isn't actually history.
Right, yeah.
And, we talked about this, I think, in our very first flashlight of the season, that some of the old school wargamers didn't really like the turn of D&D towards fantasy. But by this point, it's like 2000. It had been fantasy for a
very long time.
Yeah, and most people thought of it as a fantasy game.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, feedback on 3rd edition, pretty positive. We'll link to some contemporary reviews. Side note, a nice thing about the season getting to the point where it's 2000 is that a lot of this is still online.
Yeah.
And, the contemporary reviews suggest that the mechanics are maybe a little bit overwhelming and get a little bit confusing.
D&D gets a little bit confusing and overwhelming. Oh, my.
As a 5th edition player, you have no idea how bad it can get. And we'll go through it a little bit later. But the switch to using D20s for your successes and failures, as you said, streamlined a lot. It did mean adding and subtracting a whole lot of numbers, right? Like, you had to start keeping track of like, I have this spell on me and the bard is doing this. And so you had a lot of effects that would stack that way.
Right.
On top of that D20 roll. The character skills are also a lot. Like, I think the most skill-intensive system we talked about was Genesis last season, right? Mm-hmm. But in 3rd edition, probably more crunch in terms of specific skills. There's a whole lot of very specific, like, how in 5th edition there's like perception, insight, stealth. 3rd edition had pickpocket.
Yeah.
And alchemy. And these skills that were so specific. And they also had skills that, like, I'm going to be honest, they really feel like they were intended to give players out-of-world information. Like innuendo, a skill check you roll to tell someone something else through innuendo.
Okay.
And intuit direction when you're trying to follow someone. And those really feel like skill checks that you're doing to kind of smuggle in information that the real world players know into the game.
That sounds like mechanics for what should be, or what I like to do, it's like role playing.
A little bit, yeah.
You know how I'd rather, instead of rolling dice, I'd rather talk my way.
I've very much noticed
this. Sometimes I do feel like these games, like, it's just perception check, walk into the room, do a certain role, and then as a player I'm going to just state that and then see if the dice give me the answer I want. And that's kind of, I don't know, that's not very fun for me personally.
Yeah, I think you got to be careful with the flow of information, right?
Yeah.
And on one hand, it's ridiculous to have someone roll a history check to recall basic facts about the world.
Right.
Oh, what's the name of the city we're in? Give me a history check. Man, you're doing pretty badly if you don't know that. On the other hand, sometimes, a question like, well, which way did the villain go? It's also kind of feels silly to have someone just roll a D20 and, narrate them just figuring it out if they get a high enough number. Because it's kind of like, well, in narrative, how did you get that information?
Right. It just depends on, like, are we building a narrative story together, like players and Dungeon Master, or is the Dungeon Master like presenting a game and acting like a computer that is crunching numbers to get through it? Because video games do that really efficiently.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
So that's like kind of the beauty of playing D&D at a table with people. And then I think the addition of having just like flat D20 rolls for like a lot of things to just kind of role play something and then can decide when it needs to be a chance, a factor of chance as to whether you were successful or partially successful is really cool. And I guess that, like you said, Pathfinder comes out of this version,
yes.
Right? Yeah. Okay. It's all starting to make sense.
We'll talk a little bit more about Pathfinder
later. We're getting
later.
into more flexibility with how you can make characters and stuff, and so that gets more complicated in these versions.
Yes.
And then tables for like interacting with the world become less complicated, because earlier it's like you do 5 rolls to like see what your horse is like. I believe, like,
yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to describe the trade-off. And I think there was an intention to make combat simpler and more streamlined. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it does feel a little bit hack and slash. You're still rolling that D20 a lot of times, but you're always rolling a D20. So there's like a bit of improvement, right? Anyway, the system is not terrible, but 3 years later, Wizards of the Coast comes out with D&D 3.5. And the 0.5 is meant to signify it's not a full new edition, you know, but it actually wasn't backwards compatible. And
wow. It wasn't backwards compatible?
No, you basically had to buy a new player's handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual.
Why would they call it 3.5 if you have to buy completely new?
Because the changes weren't huge, right? The changes in D&D 3rd edition, those were
massive.
Big.
Okay,
3 to 3.5, you know, they streamlined a lot of the excessive crunch. They merged in some of those skills.
Okay.
They made some classes that had felt very underpowered in 3 a little more mechanically worthwhile to play by boosting their stats and their abilities.
Okay, that does warrant a new book, I guess.
I guess, yeah. They changed the names of a lot of spells.
Okay.
Yeah. So like these changes are mostly for the better, right? 3.5 still gets played today quite a bit, and 3 doesn't. But releasing a new book so quickly after the old one is like kind of a confusing move. And it's worth thinking about the trade-off there, right? Like, so we're flashing back for a moment to 2003, an era where people are buying books and not online subscriptions. And like, if you release a new book, that means more revenue in the short run because people are buying the book. But if you keep doing that over time, it kind of destroys your credibility. Because who's going to buy a book now if they know if you establish a reputation of churning out new editions? People are probably going to hold off a little bit because you don't want to buy the new book if it's just going to be superseded soon.
Yeah.
And you might not want to buy a new book if all the third-party sources and the supplementary material are going to be completely incompatible 3 years later.
Yeah, and then also if you're just playing that version for a while, like, why would you want to jump to a new version like 2 years later or something, depending?
Yeah, I mean, personally, like a lot of our guests, I find it hard to finish a campaign in 3 years.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's kind of remarkable to think about, you know, a new version coming out that fast. It's worth noting that Monty Cook, one of the 3 designers of 3rd edition, wrote in 2003 that the 3.5 update had been planned from the start by the business team. And we'll link to his blog post on this from 2003 because like they would eventually want to boost sales. And so he says, as of 2003, he said, well, they were already planning to do that during the development of 3rd edition, like 5 years previously. And, you know, it's worth noting that he and most of the 3rd edition design team and also most of the 3rd edition business team who like released the game 3rd edition in 2000 had left by 2003 when 3.5 came out. So it's hard to say what the decision-making process looks like internally. I couldn't find a cool magazine article on the playtests, nor could I find any credits for who the playtesters were. So 3.5 was a little more locked down and a little more internal as far as I can tell. Yeah. Anyway, after releasing 3rd edition in 2000 and 3.5 in 2003, WotC released 4th edition in 2008 and 5th edition in 2013. So they were really just churning out these editions quite fast, right? Each one of those new editions had a new Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual, Player's Handbook, kind of new third-party supplements, a new way of playing. And then finally, they let 5th edition be its own thing for like a full decade. And that long-run stability has made 5th edition like the standard D&D version, and what most people talk about when they say they play D&D. And we'll talk a lot more in the next couple flashlights about 5th edition. A lot more. Somewhat off topic for this flashlight, but I feel like we'd kind of be remiss if we didn't mention it. 3.5 provided the foundation for another big iconic role-playing game, right? In the mid-2000s, there was a company called Paizo, founded by former WotC employee Lisa Stevens, and they were publishing Dungeon Magazine and Dragon Magazine, the two magazines we mentioned earlier.
Wait, they're publishing both of them at the same time?
Yes. Oh. So these magazines were kind of companion magazines.
Okay.
They were like licensed from TSR or Wizards of the Coast, and they had a really close relationship. Like a lot of old editions where like, you know, new items would come out in them, or new kind of compatible supplementary material would come out in them. But in the mid-2000s, magazines were in decline because internet.
Yeah.
And Paizo shifted towards publishing like long-form adventures in the D&D 3.5 rule set every month. And so you could subscribe to Paizo, and they would every month send you a new adventure in the 3.5 rule set.
Cool.
Yeah. In 2007, though, when WotC announced 4th edition, Paizo was like, okay, this is going to be a problem if you're going to keep releasing new editions on us. We're going to build our own TTRPG system for subsequent adventures.
Oh, interesting.
And that system was, you know, kind of based on the 3.5 rules. At the time, people called it D&D 3.75. And it actually ended up being so popular that that's what people think of when they think of Paizo now. It's Pathfinder.
Okay.
That's where Pathfinder came out of. And that's also one of the most played TTRPG systems today.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So just to give you a sense of what 3rd edition was like, I thought we could maybe walk through character creation. I'm going to pull up a character creation guide.
All right. Do I need a pencil for this?
I'm so sorry. I think we can do this without pencil and paper. This is all going to be on the screen. It is going to take a little while, but you'll get to see what the crunch level is like. First off, what is your character name going to be?
Oh gosh.
I can hit the random name button if you like.
Let's maybe try the random name button. I can't read that.
Gim Thostry.
Gim Fostry.
Thostry.
Gim?
Yeah. Gim. We love it. Player name, obviously Reilly. This is D&D 3rd edition, so the lineages or species are called race. You can be human, elf, dwarf, halfling, half-elf, half-orc, or gnome.
I'll be a gnome.
A gnome.
A gnome named Gim.
Yes, and you can be, and it's kind of wild how modern these versions, after the last few flashlights where it's like, this does not feel modern, in this version of D&D, the classes seem kind of like what we're used to today. They got barbarian, bard, cleric, druid, fighter, monk, paladin, ranger, rogue, sorcerer, or wizard.
Ooh, I'm going to be a rogue, like a little gnome rogue called Gim.
So give me a sense of Gim's like backstory for a moment.
Gim's backstory?
Yeah, just tell me what Gim the gnome rogue is like.
Gim lives in a little like cave house under a giant tree.
Okay.
Among the roots. How tall are gnomes? Because I want to be like super small.
I don't know, like 2.5 feet tall.
2.5 feet tall?
Yeah.
Can I be even shorter than that?
How short do you want to be?
Can I be like a foot tall?
I don't see why not.
Sweet. I'm like a foot tall.
Horrifying.
But then I also have like a pointy hat.
So you're 2 feet tall with the hat.
I'm 1.5 feet tall with a hat.
That's proportionally a huge hat.
I had 6 inches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tall hat on a full-sized human, never mind a gnome. What makes you roguelike?
I'm small and I sneak around.
Hell yeah. What would you say your alignment is?
My alignment, I'm going to say, I'm a little bit cheeky.
Okay. Would you say you're chaotic?
I'm definitely chaotic.
Would you say you're good, evil, neutral?
I'm probably chaotic good.
Chaotic good. You love to see it. I'm going to say that in terms of deity, how would you feel about Garl Glittergold, the god of gnomes?
That sounds amazing.
Great, because in this version, you have to worship a god that has a similar alignment to you. And we are going to say that you are, do you want to be like a level 7 rogue?
Sure.
Cool, let's do that. All right, so we're just going to roll your ability scores, automatically generate them. You get 1 bonus ability point to use on your strength, dex, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. Once again, feels a lot like modern D&D. Mm-hmm. Where would you like to use it?
I want to use it on dexterity. Dexterity is like agility and stuff.
Yeah,
right?
for gnomes that makes a ton. For a rogue rather, that makes a ton
yeah.
of sense. Now we get to the crunchy part. We're going to get into your skills. You have 100 skill points. And about 40 different skills you can use them on. Some of them make a lot of sense for a rogue, right? You might think that a rogue would need disguise, escape artist, forgery.
Yeah, those all sound amazing.
Like open lock might make sense. Others like swim, I'm not sure you'd be using. Knowledge dungeoneering. Heal. Less clear. Anyway, you have 100 skill points to use up between 35 or 40 skills. And now you're starting to see where the crunch comes in because there are separate checks for your knowledge of architecture, your knowledge of nobility, and a lot of other things that I think in modern versions we think of as, use rope is its own unique skill check.
Oh my goodness, that's a skill check there.
Yep.
I definitely want to be good at sneaking around in architecture.
You want to be good at architecture?
Yeah.
So I think we can give you 5 points in architecture and sneaking. So I think that's probably going to be something like move silently.
Move silently, absolutely.
Let's max that out too.
Yeah.
How do you feel about maxing out, I don't know, climb or escape artist or something?
Definitely escape artist.
Hell yeah, let's max that out. Disguise, perhaps?
Yes.
You're starting to see that there's a lot of different skill checks in this game.
I'm starting to think I'm going to be trying to steal things.
I'm starting to think you might not be chaotic good. I guess it depends who you're stealing from, right?
I could be exactly, Robin Hood type gnome.
Do you think open lock?
Yeah.
So Robin Hood claimed noble birth in the original stories, which is always kind of a weird concept because it's like, you lead this big organization. You live in a pretty comfortable house out in the woods. You yourself are a noble. Like, the connection to doing good for society is a little bit tenuous. Anyway, enough editorializing about Robin Hood. How do you think your jump skill would be?
I feel like I'm just really high.
Really high for jump or really high for climb?
Can I do both?
Yeah, of course we can.
Jumping and climbing?
You have so many skill points to use in this version of D&D, and we'll figure out a way to post this character sheet online so that everyone can marvel at how many stats there are to keep track of. What about sleight of hand? Probably high?
Sleight of hand high.
Cool. We still have more skill points to use. Your character is quite specialized. We're every stat we mentioned, we're maxing out.
Yeah.
If we were just distributing these, this would take 3 times as long.
Let's keep going. I want to use all those points.
Absolutely. Do you think you'd have good hide ability?
Yeah. I'm imagining Gim Fostery is like a Ethan Hunt type character, really tiny from Mission Impossible. You know,
but 1 foot tall.
But 1 foot tall with a 6-inch hat on.
Okay, I'm going to say that...
And can jump really high and scale things and has disguises.
He probably is good at forgery as well.
Yeah.
All right. That maxes out all your skills. Now let's select your feats. You have 3 feat points.
3 feat points, okay.
And
there's, you just keep scrolling. There's a million feats.
Dozens of feats.
Oh my gosh.
I think that you might want to be perhaps deceitful or athletic or agile or acrobatic.
I definitely want to be acrobatic.
Acrobatic. Let's give you a point in that. Do you want to take perhaps lightning reflexes?
Yes, lightning reflexes, because I got rope abilities, right? Because I want to be literally like going into the Pentagon and stealing like the secret codes via hanging down from the ceiling. You know what I'm talking about?
I absolutely do. Can I pitch one to you that kind of illustrates how specific these feats are? Snatch arrows.
Oh, dang.
Let's get you snatch arrows too.
I only have 3 of them, right?
Oh, you're not eligible to get snatch arrows. Yes.
I don't think that's so specific. Like
part of the okay. Just for the audience, like some of them are like tower shield proficiency. A lot of these are very specific.
Do we get skill points as we go along in the game?
I believe we do.
Okay, yeah.
How do you feel about athletic?
I mean, I think I should be athletic. Like I'm already.
Or
what's the
die
difference?
hard?
I mean, I saw that.
Or deft hands?
Deft hands or die hard. What is die hard? And I really want to do that one, I think.
Let's look that one up.
Yeah. What's your favorite Die Hard movie?
Never seen them.
No, you've never seen any of them? No. Didn't we watch the first one together?
I'm lying. I've seen them. I've seen that one with you. Die Hard literally means it's hard for you to die. When reduced to between -1 and -9 hit points, you automatically become stable. You don't have to roll death saves.
I mean, that sounds amazing. I want to be Die Hard.
Let's do that then.
Die Hard, hard to die.
Yeah, it's a great name.
Yeah.
Unfortunately...
That's it for my skill points, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So...
I've got acrobatic, sleight of hand.
And Die Hard. So you also get equipment.
Okay.
And this is... So the equipment list here is actually... It looks pretty modern. These weapons, it is pretty pared down from older versions. How would you feel about having like a crossbow, perhaps?
I think so. Can I attach a rope or a line to the crossbow so I can shoot it across areas and climb to...
Absolutely. I'll call that a heavy crossbow.
Heavy crossbow. I'm a tiny gnome with a heavy crossbow. Amazing.
Do you have any kind of armor on?
I'm already I mean, what there's a lot of armor there.
Yeah.
I'm already a
like
diehard.
Studded leather?
I mean, studded leather sounds cool. How many points do I get for all of this?
This is just whatever gear we think you should. So this is how much money. Well, we're only going to give you 1 armor and 1 weapon for the sake of this. But,
okay, but that costs money in this.
That costs money.
Okay,
exactly.
gotcha.
There's still that kind of real focus on
money equals
XP.
as XP.
It's
gotcha.
not quite as literal, but like as you level up, you definitely have more money. And then in terms of stuff you definitely have some grappling hooks.
Yes.
Some rope.
Of course.
And perhaps some ever-burning torches, holy water, antitoxin. Let's give you each of those. Cool. This list just keeps on going. We're going to give you one more thing, and I think that's going to be an outfit. Would you say that you have an artisan's outfit, a cleric's vestment, a cold weather outfit, a courtier's outfit, an entertainer's outfit, an explorer, a monk, a noble, a peasant, a royal, a scholar, or a traveler?
I might have like an entertainer's. I feel like cold is just practical.
Yeah, cold
is
is practical.
Coat, or like a puffy coat.
Let's give you both. So that's your equipment. And then I think that's everything you get. So here's your character. and you have, these are the skills in which you have a special proficiencies. In everything else, it's going to be some combination of your various other stats that is going to determine how much you add to the roll, and each of those skills has a different role associated with it.
Okay. My eyes, I'm glazing over a bit, but
that is kind of the point I'm trying to make. There is a lot going on. This game is mechanically crunchy.
I'm honestly super excited about Gim.
I think
I
Gim
imagine,
is a fun character.
Have you seen Brazil?
No.
Robert De Niro plays this like side character who literally like just climbs up a tall building and like pops in the window of the protagonist's like apartment. It's very goofy.
Is it like a comedy or a?
It's a Terry Gilliam movie. Oh no, more blanks for. It's a famous for being, well, Terry Gilliam is a director who is famous for making very high fantasy, like satirical but weird movies that take forever to make and have tons of problems with them always, but are very like specific. Like he made Time Bandits, which is about like dwarves going through time with a kid, and they like have a ship and stuff.
Honestly,
He made Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. He was one of the Monty Python people. Did you watch Monty Python? Do you know what Monty Python is, Jake?
Yes, I know what Monty Python is. I feel like making this podcast really helps me identify with someone who makes projects that take a while to come out that are plagued with technical issues.
We don't need to get into the back end of making this show for you lovely listeners.
Our lovely listeners whom we love. Let's get back to it. In conclusion, Dungeons & Dragons 3rd Edition was the first version to come out under the new corporate overlords, Wizards of the Coast. It benefited from some big changes, and it's honestly kind of remarkable how much it feels like modern D&D. Extremely crunchy modern D&D. Wizards of the Coast followed up just 3 years later with 3.5, which streamlined a lot of these issues. And 3.5 still gets played today, as does Pathfinder, which was built out of 3.5 rules.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway.
Wow.
Right? That's all for this week.
I'm Production Master Reilly.
And I'm Dungeon Inspector Jake.
If you're enjoying the show, subscribe and leave a review.
It helps other people find the show.
And will also grant your party the ability to solve that big dungeon puzzle without needing any extra hints.
For more on the show, including links to all our social media, visit foldedfrequencies.com/campaign spotlight.